Hi, everyone. It's my great honor to be here tonight, so thank you. I was asked to talk tonight about my personal journey home from war, and in thinking about how to do that, I decided tonight to talk about some things that I've never talked about, so bear with me. It'll take a little while, not too long, I promise. Also, the staff asked me to let you know that occasionally when I'm public speaking, I have the tendency, a little tick, to clear my throat. I'm going to try my best not to do that, but there's nothing wrong with me if I do. So just wanted to let you know. So to tell my story about my journey home from war, I have to start by telling the story about my journey into war. And it happened somewhere in the Midwest in June 2001. My wife, Mary Ann, and I were driving from Virginia to Southern California on our first permanent change of station move as a married couple. We'd only been married for a couple of weeks. Being a brand new Marine spouse during the drive, Mary Ann asked me if I'd ever have to deploy. I remember telling her that since I was assigned to a Reconnaissance Battalion, a unit who at the time only deployed platoon-sized detachments, that unless the entire 1st Marine Division deployed, I wouldn't be deployed, and the likelihood of the whole 1st Marine Division getting deployed was really unlikely. 3 months later, on September 11th, 2001, American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. And United Airlines Flight 93 crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. 9 days later, during his address to a joint session of Congress, President Bush ordered the United States military to be ready. At that moment, I knew that the unlikely event my wife and I talked about on the drive west had come true. Like so many others, the 9/11 attacks changed the trajectory of my life and my family's life forever. 4 combat deployments followed, 2 to Iraq and 2 to Afghanistan. These deployments changed me and my family indelibly. The moments from these deployments that have now become my memories include periods of boredom and homesickness, punctuated by incredibly intense moments of excitement, aggression, fear, and immense pride. I remember on March 20th, 2003, as a company commander in 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, talking to my company the night before we invaded Iraq. 2 days prior to the invasion, the entirety of 1st Marine Division departed our camps and spread out across the northern Kuwaiti desert in order to avoid being targeted by Iraqi Scud missiles. I remember looking at the formation of Marines in front of me as I gave my final directions to the company before we mounted our vehicles and moved into the breach. Due to the threat of Iraqi chemical attacks, we were all in our chemical protection suits. We'd already donned our gas masks 3 or 4 times due to false alarms about inbound Iraqi missiles. Charlie Company, my company, had been training for this moment for over a year. The company's anticipation and pent-up energy hung thick in the air. I'll always remember the intense pride I felt leading that company of elite Marines. I remember feeling like this was exactly where I was meant to be at the time, leading Marines into combat. 14 days later, my company was leading a battalion maneuver around the city of Al-Qut in order to establish a blocking position on the main highway leading into Al-Qut from the north. Looking back on that day after it was over, our battalion called it the Thunder Run because of all the enemy fire we fought through to get to the northern edge of the city. A lot happened that day, but the memory that will be with me forever is of the Iraqi man who slowly carried his 12-year-old daughter's limp body by my position that day. She'd been killed in the fighting. Her father carried her across his chest like he'd carry an infant as he shuffled by my vehicle. Although I was not yet a father myself, I will never forget the look of pure anguish on that Iraqi man's face. 5 days later, on April 9th, 2003, I found myself at the lead of a battalion reconnaissance force to Baqiba, Iraq, about 90 miles north of Baghdad. At that time, we were the northernmost Marine unit in Iraq. Throughout the previous 20 days, my company had fought through 7 engagements with the Iraqi Regular Army and Fedayeen forces. On the movement from Baghdad to Baqiba, my battalion had to rely heavily on air power to defeat the armored vehicles that outgunned our Humvee-mounted light infantry forces. Despite the dangers that we faced, the pressure I felt as a commander, and the fatigue from being constantly on the move in combat for 20 days, I remember the confidence I felt leading my company at that time. It was one of those times in my career where I was my best self as a leader. My company was running on all cylinders. We were the best in the battalion, and we knew it because more often than not, Charlie Company was the battalion main effort. A few miles outside of Bakiba, my battalion took the tactical halt, and I was called forward to my battalion commander's vehicle. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Ferrando, my battalion commander, was a wiry, high-energy Marine. He spoke with a raspy voice thanks to throat cancer that he survived in his younger years. That voice earned him the call sign Godfather, because he sounded like Marlon Brando in the classic mob movie. When I arrived at Godfather's vehicle, he told me that my company was going to conduct a reconnaissance of the Iraqi 41st Armored Brigade's headquarters that was garrisoned on the outskirts of Bakiba. He told me that before he committed the entire battalion to the attack, he needed to know what remained of the Armored Brigade. As I received my orders from Godfather, I remember thinking about the fight we went through just getting to Bakiba. Remembering the intensity of some of those engagements, I was convinced at that time that I was probably going to die leading that reconnaissance. And immediately after that thought, I remember thinking, so be it. I was at my best as a combat leader in that moment because I had accepted the potential fate that I volunteered for, to die leading my Marines if that was what was required. In that moment, I had no fear, just a calm resolve to lead my Marines and to do my duty. Even though I was married, I knew my wife, Mary Ann, would be okay. You see, we didn't have kids yet. And Mary Ann is both super hot and super smart. So I knew she'd be okay. But this changed a year later when we had our first child. The thought of my kids growing up without me made me a much more reluctant warrior. But like all my brothers and sisters in arms, my fellow warriors, I continued to deploy, put myself in harm's way, and do my duty. It was just a lot harder once I became a father. I served that reconnaissance in Bakiba, as you can tell. In fact, we accomplished the mission without firing a shot, as the Iraqi brigade had abandoned their headquarters. The place was empty and eerily quiet. 363 days later, on April 7, 2004, I found myself back in Iraq. I was still with 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, this time deployed to Fallujah, Iraq. In the previous deployment, we were an invading force, on the offensive, constantly seizing the initiative. This time, we were now an occupying force, fighting for stability, to give the fledgling new Iraqi government time and space to be able to stand on its own 2 feet against the insurgent and terrorist forces that were trying to tear Iraq apart. Fighting for the initiative in this fight was a lot harder. I was now the battalion operations officer, no longer responsible for a single company of Marines. I was now responsible for planning and improving the entire battalion's combat operations. Although my new battalion commander was accountable for everything that the battalion did and failed to do, he relied on me to plan, coordinate, and orchestrate all of the battalion's tactical actions. I approved the plans for every patrol, every attack, every fire support plan, and every movement in our area of operations. Although I don't remember the precise time, it was early in the afternoon on April 7th, 2004. It was a typical hot, hazy day in Iraq, a lot like it was here today. I was working at my desk in the Battalion Combat Operations Center when one of the Marines from the watch came into my office to tell me that Bravo Company was in a TIC. TIC stands for Troops in Contact. It meant that Bravo Company was in a fight with the enemy. Just the day prior, I had approved an operation where Bravo Company would move to a temporary patrol base about 30 kilometers away from our battalion base to conduct patrol operations from there for several days. I immediately went to the radio and requested a situation report from the Bravo Company commander. Bravo's CO reported that his lead platoon, 2nd platoon, had been ambushed by rocket-propelled grenades and effective machine gun fire. He reported that the lead Humvee had been disabled, that he had multiple wounded Marines, conditions unknown, that his company was now taking mortar fire, and that he was attempting to maneuver the rest of the company on the enemy position. He reported that his entire company was committed, and he requested that I launch the Battalion Quick Reaction Force. I immediately ordered the Battalion Fire Support Coordinator to push air support to Bravo Company, sent a runner to notify the battalion commander and the Quick Reaction Force, and ran back to my office to get my weapon and my body armor. 30 minutes later, I arrived at the site of the ambush with my battalion CO and the Quick Reaction Force. With the help of Marine Cobra gunships, Bravo Company by that time had pushed the enemy off the ambush site, had medevaced its wounded, and was only taking sporadic mortar fire at the time. I monitored the battalion tactical radio nets during the Quick Reaction Force's movement to the ambush site and had learned that one of the wounded was Captain Brent Morrell, 2nd Platoon's platoon commander. At that time, I didn't know the extent of his wounds. Upon arriving at the ambush site, I talked to Bravo's company commander, who told me that Brent had suffered a gunshot wound in his torso and was in urgent medevac. Also critically injured in the ambush was Sergeant Eddie Wright, a machine gunner with 2nd Platoon, who took the brunt of a rocket-propelled grenade when it impacted his vehicle. Eddie lost both his hands that day. Eddie is also an alumnus of Warriors in Quiet Waters. Bravo Company did their duty that day and upheld the legacy of the United States Marine Corps and a 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. They ended the fight standing on the enemy's ground. The heroism of Bravo's Recon Marines carried the day. That heroism was exemplified by Captain Brent Morrell. Brent was in the third vehicle of the 2nd Platoon convoy. When Eddie's vehicle was disabled in the kill zone, without hesitation, Brent ordered his platoon to dismount and counterattack the ambush on foot. As Brent sprinted over the first berm into the teeth of the enemy fire, he was hit by machine gun fire that entered his torso through the side, missing his body armor. Brent did not survive his wounds and was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, our nation's 2nd highest award for valor. One other Bravo Company Marine won a Navy Cross that day, and 5 Bravo Company Marines won Silver Stars that day. Although I was not the commander of Bravo Company, all of the battalion's Marines were my Marines. I received and approved Bravo's operational plan that day. Brent Morrell was one of my Marines from very early on in his Marine Corps career. I first met Brent when he was a 2nd lieutenant, attending as a student the Ground Intelligence Officer course, the training course that I ran as the course director. Having seen Brent's leadership and capability in the course, I later pushed to have Brent assigned to 1st Reconnaissance Battalion as a platoon commander. He was one of my Marines, and I was responsible for the battalion's operations that day. 5 months after that day, I came home to meet my oldest son for the first time. He was 6 months old. Later that year, I rotated to a job in the Pentagon, followed by 1 year as a student at the U.S. Naval War College. In 2010, I found myself back in 1st Marine Division, deploying twice to Afghanistan. First as a member of the division staff, and next as the commanding officer of 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, the unit that I fought with in Iraq. This time I was the battalion commander, the old man, responsible and accounting for everything that the battalion did and failed to do. For the first half of this deployment as a battalion commander, my battalion was assigned to an area of operations in the infamous Upper Sangin Valley, one of the most hotly contested areas in all of Afghanistan, an area where over 170 U.S. and British service members gave the ultimate sacrifice. We took over in Sangin after most of the fighting was over. The battalions that preceded us had beaten the enemy and put them on their heels. When we arrived, our mission was to maintain the security our predecessors created, help build the capacity of the Afghan National Army forces, and connect the local Afghans in our area of operations to the Afghan government through outreach and economic incentives. My battalion was spread across 3 patrol bases in our area of operations, with my battalion headquarters at Patrol Base Alcatraz. PB Alcatraz was sited on a bluff above the valley floor. The day we took over in Sangin, I remember looking at the valley below and realizing that the security and well-being of every human within eye shot was now my responsibility. The hard-won security that we inherited in Sangin endured during our time there, and I spent a lot of time eating goat and drinking tea with the local Afghan officials. These sures gave me an opportunity to come to know many of the Afghans in our area of operations well, and I came to greatly respect and admire the Afghan people. I saw firsthand how they literally carved a hardscrabble life out of the dirt every day. I saw how centuries of war had shaped their survival instincts and their attitudes about foreigners. I saw in the most basic way that we were not that different. For as President Kennedy said in 1963, in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet, we all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. In the latter half of my battalion's deployment to Afghanistan, we were relieved of a relatively benign area of operations in the Sangin Valley and tasked with conducting helicopter raids in enemy-held territory throughout the division's area of operations. This was a mission that we had trained for, and my Marines and I were eager to get into the fight. Our first raid, we inserted into a district that had no NATO or Afghan forces assigned to it, took the fight to the enemy for 5 days, and extracted as planned. On our second raid into a different location, we took fire from the enemy during insert, but were able to effectively suppress it, get on the ground, and once again take the fight to the enemy for several days before we extracted. With 2 successful raids under our belt, the division staff upped the ante and assigned us the task of conducting our third raid into a Taliban safe haven north of the Kajaki Dam, an area where U.S. conventional forces had never operated. My company commanders, battalion staff, and I spent a week planning the operation. We combed over every bit of intelligence we could get. We studied maps and overhead imagery for hours, memorizing the terrain. We knew it would be tough, but we were confident in our Marines, our planning, and our capability. On the night of our insert, we had 2 companies of Marines loaded in 6 MV-22 tilt-rotor aircraft. We picked a moonless night to take advantage of our night vision capabilities. We fired artillery illumination rounds 20 kilometers to the west of our insert area to confuse the enemy. We jammed the enemy's communications networks. The one thing that we couldn't do is fire preparatory fires into our landing zone because the rules of engagement didn't allow for it. With that constraint, and despite all of our preparation, on our approach to the landing zone, our force took intense rocket-propelled grenade and machine gun fire, a hot landing zone that prevented the MV-22s from landing and inserting our force. We attempted to divert to our alternate landing zones, but enemy fire there prevented us from getting on the ground as well. Although our standard operating procedures called for a mission abort when neither the primary or alternate landing zones were tenable, the weight I felt having to make the decision to abort the raid was crushing. It was an intense, humbling experience. For the first time in my career, I did not end a fight standing on the enemy's ground. These are some of the experiences that shaped my war and have influenced my journey home from war. This journey hasn't happened all at once. It's happened over time, starting with my trip home to Montana following my second deployment to Iraq, the deployment where we lost Brent Morrell. During this trip home, I retreated to Montana's mountains and her streams. I was looking for solace, a place where I could reckon with everything I saw and experienced in war, make meaning of the carnage and the sacrifice I witnessed, and buttress my resolve to be the best Marine that I could be and continue to serve. Being a Montana kid who grew up fishing and hunting, I knew instinctively the healing power of quiet, uncrowded places that have been untrammeled by modern society. These are the places where I've always felt the most settled and centered. These are the places that I've felt closest to God. These are the places I've been able to make meaning of my service and the sacrifice that I witnessed. Eric Hastings, another Montana kid, knew this too when he conceived the Warriors in Quiet Waters fishing experience for post-9/11 warriors. Eric knew from his experiences of war that if he immersed these warriors in the pristine physical environment of southwest Montana and taught them how to fly fish, a totally immersive activity, an activity that serves as a never-ending series of occasions for hope, that these warriors would find the healing and the meaning that they needed. What Eric knew instinctively has since been proven by science, with numerous peer-reviewed studies proving the healing power of immersive experiences in nature in general and of fly fishing in particular. This is part of the magic that makes Warriors in Quiet Waters program so impactful to our warriors. My journey home continued, unknowingly at first, when I was assigned a very unique job on the Joint Staff at the Pentagon. I was now a post-command lieutenant colonel and a graduate of the U.S. Army War College. I had my sights set on making colonel and earning the opportunity to command Marines again. I'd been told by my assignments officer that I would be serving in the Joint Operations Directorate, a place where I would be required to row hard, but also a place where I could earn my bones and be competitive for promotion and command. When I checked into the Joint Staff Personnel Office on my first day, I was told by an Air Force Chief Warrant Officer that I was not being assigned to the Operations Directorate, but rather to a place called the Chairman's Office of Reintegration. When I asked the Chief Warrant Officer what that office did, he replied that he wasn't sure, but that my new boss was an Army colonel named Eisenhower, and that he would be able to let me know what the job was all about. When I checked in with Colonel Eisenhower, I learned that the Chairman's Office of Reintegration was created by Admiral Mullen, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, and that the office's purpose was to create effective transition and reintegration pathways for our nation's transitioning service members and veterans. Upon hearing this, I was alarmed. I was alarmed because this was not what I envisioned doing during my Joint Staff tour, because I knew nothing about veteran transition and reintegration, and because I was concerned that it would put me so far outside my military occupational specialty that I wouldn't be competitive for command or promotion again. I was so alarmed that when I went home that day, I started calling mentors, Marine generals that I worked for, asking if they could help get my orders changed. To a man, they all told me, rightly, to put my nose to the grindstone and bloom where I was planted. After a year, I could request a transfer and all would be well. Sufficiently straightened out and recalibrated by these mentors, I went back to the Pentagon the next day, determined to become an expert at veteran transition and reintegration, and to do my best work while I was assigned there. This assignment not only turned out to be one of the best staff jobs I had in my Marine Corps career, but also shaped the path of my post-Marine Corps career and life. In this job, I was immersed in the challenges related to veteran transition and reintegration. I was exposed to many hundreds of veteran services organizations, foundations, and private corporations who are serving our post-9/11 veterans, helping them recover from the trauma of their service and becoming productive, fulfilled citizen veterans. During the 3 years I was assigned to the Chairman's Office of Reintegration, I spoke to hundreds of transitioning service members and veterans and learned of the challenges and struggles all veterans face trying to transform themselves from warriors to veterans. It was during this time that I found my passion for serving veterans, and it's because of my time in the Chairman's Office of Reintegration that I stand here today as the Executive Director of Warriors and Quiet Waters Foundation. And it turns out that Colonel Eisenhower, an Army colonel, was also one of the best leaders I would ever work for. And that's saying a lot coming from a Marine. My journey home from war became nearly complete last year when I retired from the Marine Corps after 27 years of service to seize the opportunity to become part of this team, the Warriors and Quiet Waters team, and live here, back home in Montana, near family and lifelong friends, and to live among the quiet and crowded places that I always ran to following my combat deployments. But the truth is that my journey home from war will never be complete. It will never be complete because I left pieces of me in Iraq and Afghanistan. Not physical pieces of me, like so many of my brothers and sisters, but emotional and spiritual pieces of me. Memories of the father carrying his daughter killed in the firefight my company fought through at Al-Qud. The guilt over losing Captain Brent Morrell that endures today. The wonder if I could have done more to prevent that ambush. Memories of 4 other friends that were killed in combat. Captain Alan Rowe, Major Kevin Nave, Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Shea, and Sergeant Major Robert Cottle. The regret over failing to finish the fight in Kajaki standing on the enemy's ground. The mental struggle that continues to this day over whether the blood we spilled was worth it or not, especially now as we're withdrawing from Afghanistan and ceding everything that we fought so hard for back to the Taliban. The questions that linger today over whether I did everything that I could for my Marines that struggled with their own journey home. These are the things that continue to get in the way of completing my journey home. After all these years, I've grown as a result of these experiences. In contemplating the dead and all they and their families have lost, I've resolved to live every day to its fullest, to not waste the precious time I have left, the precious time they didn't get. But the guilt and regret lingers, and the memories of the dead continue to pop up at unexpected times. But my experiences pale in comparison to the struggles faced by so many of our veterans and their families. I have brothers in arms who run out of fingers and toes before they finish counting all the Marines they lost in combat. My experiences pale in comparison to those who were in tougher fights, saw greater horrors, and who sacrificed so much more. Our combat wounded service members, our Gold Star families, those whose scale of loss and guilt eclipse mine, and those who continue to struggle today with mental health challenges. My experiences pale in comparison to warriors like Master Sergeant Colt Shermer. Colt was a Marine Raider, a member of Marine Special Operations Command, who served under my command at the Marine Raider Training Center. Colt was a high-performing Marine. He was elite, squared away, high potential. He volunteered 3 times to serve in the toughest fights of the post-9/11 era. First, he volunteered to be a Marine. Next, he volunteered to become a Reconnaissance Marine. And he volunteered a 3rd time to become a Marine Raider, a Special Operations Marine. At the time I met Colt, he had been in the Marine Corps for about 14 years. He was a veteran of double-digit combat deployments. He was divorced and the father of a beautiful daughter. And he struggled with mental health challenges. While he worked for me, he recognized the need for help and voluntarily underwent an intensive inpatient treatment to help him cope with his mental health and other challenges. The treatment program worked for a while. It moved Colt beyond the immediate crisis, and it made him productive again. I eventually relinquished command of the Marine Raider Training Center, and Colt moved on to the Marine Raider Regiment, where he took on the premier Special Operations Marine job, that of the Marine Special Operations Team Chief. He was at the pinnacle of his chosen profession, respected and admired by his Marines. Despite his professional success, the demons returned. Colt continued to struggle, and in the first week of June of this year, he gave up and killed himself with a firearm. In this era of COVID-19, political turmoil, and racial strife, it's easy to forget about our post-9/11 combat veterans. Even though U.S. service members continue to be deployed around the world and engaged in combat operations in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Africa, you don't hear about it on the evening news or read about it online or in our newspapers. Our warriors' service, their sacrifice, and their struggles have faded into the shadows, where they are hard to see and even harder to understand. There are 1.7 million post-9/11 combat veterans. Every one of them have a story like mine. Most of them have a harder story. Over 50,000 of them struggle with life-changing physical wounds. Nearly 700,000 of them have suffered some form of traumatic brain injury. That same number struggle with mental health conditions that will make their transition to civilian life 10 times harder. 10 times harder. The suicide rate among active duty military members and veterans who have served since 9/11 is approximately 4 times as high as the number of those killed in post-9/11 combat operations. 4 times as high. And more are coming. A large cohort of service members, nearly 200,000 in all, are on the brink of transitioning into civilian society now. These are the warriors who joined the service between 2001 and 2005 and made a career of the military. They have served nearly their entire career in a wartime environment. They have double-digit combat deployments. They are high-performing, high-capability service members who have put their combat-related struggles in a box and put it on a shelf in order to stay ready to deploy. Starting this year, they'll start retiring, and they will be forced to reckon with that box on the shelf. They will need organizations like Warriors in Quiet Waters Foundation. Even though our warriors and their struggles have faded into the shadows, they need our help to cope with the trauma of combat, to find a renewed sense of purpose, and to live their lives as veterans to their full potential. And helping them achieve their full potential is not only the right thing to do, but it will make our country better. Because when these veterans are living their full potential in our communities, our businesses, and our government, they will make them stronger and better. And finally, by ensuring that our veterans thrive following their service, we will maintain our all-volunteer force and the security that it provides our republic. Unless America's daughters and sons recognize that military service is valued and valuable, they will not raise their hands and swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. I recently listened to General Joseph Dunford talk about this. General Dunford was the 36th Commandant of the Marine Corps and the 19th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the senior officer in the U.S. military. And General Dunford said this, quote, "When I think about veterans, I think about the great expression that George Washington gave us following the Revolutionary War, that the willingness of future generations to serve will be determined by how we treat the current generation of veterans." General Dunford went on to say that today, the American people recognize and appreciate service. God help us if we lose that. Our efforts to support veterans has to be sustained. This can't be a 2 or 3 years thing in the wake of OIF and OEF. Many of these men and women have made an enduring commitment that's going to affect them and their families for the rest of our lives. Our commitment has to be no less enduring. That's why Warriors in Quiet Waters did not stop serving veterans during the COVID pandemic. That is why Warriors in Quiet Waters is working hard to expand and increase our impact. That's why we increased programming by 40% this year. That's why we started a family program this year where we bring entire military families here to Bozeman. That's why we're expanding programming by another 20% next year. That's why we need you to help us continue to serve our mission. We can't do it without you and your support. Thank you for giving so generously of your time to golf and commune with us today. Thank you for giving us so generously of your hard-earned money to enable our mission. This support is critical and appreciated so much, but I'm going to ask you for more. Help Warriors in Quiet Waters spread awareness about why it's important to continue serving post-9/11 veterans, even though their service, their sacrifice, and their needs are now hidden in the shadows. Help us recruit more Warriors in Quiet Waters supporters. Increasing our impact will require more financial resources. Help us recruit more Warriors in Quiet volunteers. Volunteers are critical to our program, and more programming will require more volunteers. Thank you all. On behalf of the Warriors and Quiet Waters Board of Directors and staff, a special thanks goes to our tournament sponsors and to our volunteer host committee who worked so hard to make this event a success. You are today's heroes. God bless you all. God bless our warriors and their families. And God bless the United States of America. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. So I'm going to be followed. Thank you very much. I'm going to be followed by fellow angler, longtime Warriors and Quiet Water supporter, and auction extraordinaire, Missy O'Malley. Where are you at, Missy? Where are you at, Missy? There she is. Please give her a hand. Thank you.